The dust swirled around Martha's worn boots as she stood at the edge of Dustwood Creek, watching the last wagon disappear into the horizon. Her family's voices still echoed in her mind, harsh words that cut deeper than any blade. 17 years old, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a growing secret beneath her threadbare dress, she had nowhere left to go. The shame of her condition had spread through the small frontier town like wildfire, and now even her own blood had turned their backs on her. Martha placed a trembling hand on her still flat belly, feeling the weight of her circumstances pressing down like the oppressive August heat. 3 months along, and already the whispers followed her wherever she went. The preacher's wife had been the first to notice the subtle changes, the way Martha's face had grown pale during Sunday service, how she'd rushed outside during hymns. Word traveled fast in a town of barely 200 souls, and by the time her father learned of her condition, the decision had already been made for her. "No daughter of mine will bring such disgrace upon this family," her father had declared, his weathered face hard as granite. "You've made your bed, girl. Now you'll lie in it somewhere else." Her mother had wept silent tears but said nothing in Martha's defense. Her younger siblings had watched from the cabin window as she was forced to pack her meager belongings, their innocent eyes wide with confusion at the sudden banishment of their beloved sister. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Martha began walking along the dusty road that led away from everything she'd ever known. She had exactly $3.47 to her name, earnings from helping Mrs. Henderson with her washing and mending. It wouldn't last long, and winter was only a few months away. The nearest town was Cedar Falls, a 2-day walk through rough country. But she had little choice. Perhaps she could find work there, though she knew her expanding waistline would soon make that impossible. As evening approached, Martha's feet ached terribly in her ill-fitting boots. She hadn't eaten since dawn, and the baby seemed to demand constant nourishment. Her stomach growled audibly as she spotted a small creek winding through a grove of cottonwoods. The water would be cool and clean, and she could rest there for the night, though the thought of sleeping alone under the stars filled her with dread. Stories of wild animals and desperate men haunted these parts, and a young woman traveling alone was vulnerable prey. She had barely settled beside the creek when the thunder of approaching hooves made her heart race. 3 riders emerged from the gathering dusk, their silhouettes dark against the orange sky. Martha scrambled to her feet, clutching her small bundle of possessions, ready to run despite her exhaustion. But there was nowhere to hide on the open prairie, and the riders had already seen her. The lead horseman was a tall man in his 30s, with sandy hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in her situation at a glance. His companions were clearly ranch hands, their faces weathered by years of outdoor work. All 3 dismounted, and the leader approached slowly, his hands visible and empty, clearly trying not to frighten her. "Evening, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "I'm Thomas Garrett, and this is my land you're resting on. Are you in some kind of trouble? You look like you've been traveling hard." His voice was gentle, without the judgment she'd grown accustomed to hearing in recent weeks. Martha lifted her chin defiantly, though her legs trembled with fatigue. "I'm just passing through, mister. I'll be gone come morning, I promise. I didn't know this was private land." She took a step backward, ready to bolt if necessary, though she knew she wouldn't get far in her condition. Thomas studied her face in the fading light, noting the youth in her features and the exhaustion in her eyes. "You're welcome to camp here tonight, but it's not safe for a young lady to be traveling alone in these parts. Where are you headed?" When she hesitated to answer, he added gently, "I'm not looking to cause you any harm. I have a daughter myself, and I'd hope someone would show her kindness if she were in need." Something in his tone, a genuine concern that she hadn't heard in weeks, caused Martha's carefully constructed defenses to crumble. Tears she'd been holding back for days finally spilled over, and the whole sordid story came pouring out. She told him about the shame that had fallen upon her family, about the father of her child who had disappeared the moment he learned of her condition, about her own family's rejection and the impossible situation she now found herself in. Thomas listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, gazing out across the darkening prairie. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. "Miss, I believe I know who the father of your child is. There's only one young man who's been through Dustwood Creek in recent months, and if I'm right, he's been running from his responsibilities in more ways than one." Martha's eyes widened in surprise. "You know Henry Patterson? But how could you possibly—" She trailed off, seeing the grim set of Thomas's jaw and the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Henry Patterson is my nephew," Thomas said quietly. "My sister's boy, though she's been gone these past 5 years. Henry's been staying at my ranch, working for me, learning the cattle business. But 3 weeks ago, he up and disappeared in the night, taking one of my best horses and a considerable sum of money from my safe. I've been tracking him ever since, but the trail went cold near Dustwood Creek." The revelation hit Martha like a physical blow. The man she'd given her heart to, who had whispered promises of love and marriage, was nothing but a common thief. Worse yet, he was the nephew of this kind stranger who was showing her more compassion than her own family had managed. The irony was almost too much to bear. Thomas saw her distress, and his expression softened. "Miss, I want you to understand that Henry's actions are his own. They don't reflect on you or the child you're carrying. In fact, I believe I have a responsibility here that goes beyond mere Christian charity. That baby you're carrying is my bloodkin, my great-nephew or great-niece, and I won't see you both suffer for Henry's cowardice." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Thomas made a decision that would change all their lives. "I'm Thomas Garrett, owner of the Triple G Ranch. It's about 10 miles north of here, and I'm offering you a place there. Not as charity, mind you, but as family. That child you're carrying is a Garrett, whether Henry chooses to acknowledge it or not, and no Garrett child will be born without a roof over their head or food on the table." Martha stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Garrett, I couldn't possibly accept such kindness from a stranger. You don't know anything about me, about my character or my past. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." Even as she spoke the words, hope was beginning to bloom in her chest for the first time in weeks. "I'm a fair judge of character, miss, and I can see the quality in you despite your circumstances. Besides, I've spent the last 3 weeks learning about my nephew's true nature, and I suspect you're more victim than villain in this tale. My ranch is large, and I could use another pair of hands, especially someone who can help in the house. My daughter Rebecca is 16 and wild as a Mustang. She could benefit from having another young woman around, someone with sense and responsibility." The next morning, Martha found herself riding behind Thomas Garrett toward a future she could never have imagined. The Triple G Ranch spread across thousands of acres of prime grazing land, with a main house that was larger and finer than any building in Dustwood Creek. Rebecca Garrett turned out to be a spirited girl, with her father's kind eyes and her late mother's auburn hair. She welcomed Martha with enthusiasm, delighted to have a companion closer to her own age. Over the following months, Martha discovered that Thomas Garrett was a man of his word in every respect. He treated her not as a charity case or hired help, but as a member of the family. She was given a comfortable room in the main house and responsibilities that matched her growing capabilities. She helped manage the household, assisted with the ranch's bookkeeping, and gradually won the respect of the cowboys and their families who lived and worked on the property. As her pregnancy advanced, Martha bloomed under the care and kindness of the Garrett family. Dr. Morrison, the closest thing to a physician within 50 miles, pronounced both mother and child healthy during his monthly visits. Thomas ensured she had proper nutrition, rest, and medical attention, treating her condition as a blessing rather than a burden. He never mentioned Henry's name, unless Martha brought up her concerns about the child's future, and even then, he was quick to reassure her that the baby would want for nothing. The other ranch families initially had their reservations about the arrangement, but Martha's gentle nature and strong work ethic soon won them over. She helped during difficult births, tended sick children, and proved invaluable during the busy seasons when every hand was needed. By the time winter arrived, she was as much a part of the Triple G community as anyone who had been born there. Rebecca, initially thrilled to have an older female companion, developed a genuine affection for Martha that went beyond mere friendship. She became fiercely protective of her, shutting down any gossip or speculation about Martha's situation with the kind of loyalty that only true family could inspire. The two young women spent long evenings planning for the baby's arrival, sewing clothes, and preparing a nursery in one of the spare bedrooms. As Martha's time approached, Thomas made arrangements for Dr. Morrison to stay at the ranch for several days to ensure a safe delivery. The baby, a healthy boy with dark hair and Thomas's distinctive green eyes, arrived on a snowy February morning. Martha named him James Garrett, with Thomas's permission and blessing. The child was welcomed into the world with more love and celebration than many legitimate children received, surrounded by a family who had chosen him rather than been obligated to accept him. In the months that followed James's birth, Martha discovered strength she never knew she possessed. Motherhood suited her, and she proved to be a natural with children. Soon she was helping other ranch wives with their little ones, becoming known throughout the territory for her skill with both healthy babies and sick children. Her reputation grew, and people began traveling considerable distances to seek her help during difficult births or childhood illnesses. Thomas watched Martha's transformation with quiet pride, seeing her grow from a frightened, abandoned girl into a confident, capable woman. He never pressured her about her future or made demands about her gratitude. Instead, he simply provided the stable, supportive environment she needed to discover her own worth and potential. He taught her to read and write beyond the basic level she'd achieved, opened his library to her, and encouraged her natural intelligence to flourish. As James grew from infant to toddler, it became clear that he had inherited more than just the Garrett eyes. He showed signs of his grandfather's intelligence and determination, as well as his mother's gentle nature. Thomas delighted in teaching the boy about ranch life, and James followed him around with the devoted attention that only a small child could manage. The bond between grandfather and grandson was evident to everyone who saw them together. One spring morning, nearly 3 years after Martha's arrival at the Triple G, a familiar figure appeared at the ranch gates. Henry Patterson, looking older and more weathered than his 22 years, rode up to the main house with his hat in his hands and shame written across his face. He had heard through the frontier grapevine about his son and had come, he claimed, to make amends and accept his responsibilities. Thomas met his nephew on the front porch, his expression carefully neutral, despite the anger that still burned in his chest. Martha, holding 2-year-old James, stood behind him, her face pale but determined. The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive. Henry offered marriage, stammering apologies and promises of reform, but his words rang hollow after years of abandonment. It was Martha who found her voice first. "Mr. Patterson," she said, using his formal name deliberately, "you gave up any claim to this child when you ran away in the night. James has a father who's been here every day of his life, teaching him and loving him and providing for his needs. He doesn't need another one, especially not one who only showed up when it was convenient." Henry looked at the child in her arms, seeing his own features mixed with the unmistakable Garrett characteristics. "But he's my son," he protested weakly. "I have rights, responsibilities. I want to do the right thing now." Thomas stepped forward, his voice cold as winter wind. The right thing was to stand by Martha when she needed you most. The right thing was to face your responsibilities like a man, instead of running like a coward. The right thing was to think of someone other than yourself for once in your miserable life. You're 3 years too late for redemption, nephew. James, sensing the tension in the adults around him, reached for Thomas with chubby arms. "Grandpa," he said clearly, one of his first words, and the simple declaration settled the matter more definitively than any legal document could have. Thomas took the child, and James settled contentedly against his chest, clearly comfortable and secure in the relationship they had built together. Henry left that same day, and though he sent occasional letters over the years, he never returned to claim his son. Martha kept one letter unopened, in case James ever wanted to know about his biological father, but she felt no obligation to facilitate a relationship that Henry had never bothered to establish. As the years passed, the Triple G Ranch prospered under Thomas's management and Martha's increasingly important contributions. She became known throughout the territory not just for her skill with children and medicine, but for her business acumen and her ability to manage complex situations with grace and intelligence. Ranchers and businessmen began seeking her advice on matters far beyond her original household responsibilities. Rebecca married a neighboring rancher's son when she turned 20, but she remained close to Martha and considered James her beloved nephew. Her own children, when they came, would grow up thinking of Martha as their aunt and James as their cousin, the family bonds strengthened by choice and affection rather than weakened by the circumstances of birth. James grew into a fine young man, inheriting his mother's compassion and his grandfather's strength of character. He never showed any interest in learning about Henry, content with the family he had always known. Thomas formally adopted him when the boy turned 10, making the relationship legal as well as emotional, and James took the Garrett name with pride. When James was 15, Thomas began teaching him the finer points of ranch management, preparing him to eventually take over the Triple G. The boy showed natural talent for working with both cattle and people, and it became clear that the ranch would be in capable hands when the time came for Thomas to step back from active management. Martha, now in her 30s, had become one of the most respected women in the territory. She had received several marriage proposals over the years from good men who would have been honored to call her wife, but she had chosen to remain single, dedicating herself to her son, her work, and the ranch that had become her true home. She found fulfillment in ways that many women of her era never experienced, combining motherhood with meaningful work and genuine independence. The story of Martha and James became something of a legend throughout the region, told around campfires and in general stores as an example of how kindness and determination could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. Thomas Garrett's decision to take in a pregnant girl and treat her child as his own grandchild was seen as the act of a truly good man, the kind of man the frontier needed more of. As James approached his 18th birthday, Martha often reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this place. The frightened, abandoned girl who had stood by Dustwood Creek all those years ago seemed like a different person entirely. She had found not just shelter and security with the Garretts, but a chance to become the woman she was always meant to be. The Triple G Ranch had given her more than just a home. It had given her the opportunity to discover her own strength, intelligence, and worth. She had built a life that many would envy, surrounded by people who loved and respected her for who she was, rather than judging her for past mistakes or circumstances beyond her control. Thomas, now in his 60s but still vigorous and active, often told Martha that she and James had brought as much to the ranch as they had received from it. The property was more prosperous and the community stronger because of their presence, and the legacy they were building together would last for generations to come. On quiet evenings, when the work was done, and the family gathered on the front porch to watch the sunset over the vast expanse of prairie, Martha sometimes thought about the different path her life might have taken. But she felt no regret for the choices that had led her here, no bitterness about the hardships she had endured. Every challenge had made her stronger, every kindness had taught her something valuable about human nature and the importance of compassion. The baby who had once seemed like a burden, a source of shame and rejection, had become the greatest blessing of her life. James was growing into exactly the kind of man the world needed more of: strong but gentle, determined but compassionate, confident but humble. He would carry forward the values that Thomas had taught him and the love that Martha had given him, creating his own legacy of kindness and responsibility. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Martha held close the knowledge that sometimes what appears to be an ending is really a beginning, that shame can transform into strength, and that the families we choose can be just as powerful and lasting as the ones we're born into. The Triple G Ranch had taught her that home isn't just a place, but a feeling of belonging, acceptance, and love that can be found in the most unexpected circumstances and with the most unlikely people. Years later, when James had children of his own and the Triple G Ranch was thriving under his management, the story of how a poor, pregnant girl found family and fortune through the kindness of a good man would still be told around dinner tables and at community gatherings. It served as a reminder that in the harsh and often unforgiving world of the frontier, acts of compassion and generosity could change lives in ways that rippled through generations, creating legacies of hope that would outlast any material wealth or social position. Martha's transformation from outcast to respected matriarch proved that a person's past doesn't have to determine their future, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the worst disasters. Her story became part of the mythology of the American West, a testament to the possibility of redemption and the power of unconditional love to heal even the deepest wounds and create new beginnings from the most unlikely circumstances. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of courage, redemption, and unexpected kindness from America's frontier days. In the comments below, tell us about a time when a stranger's kindness changed your life or someone you know, or share what you think Martha's greatest strength was in overcoming her difficult circumstances. Your stories and thoughts help build our community of history lovers, so don't be shy about sharing your own family legends or favorite moments from this tale.